Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you thank you, Giovanni. Thank you to the hosts of the meeting. We always welcome any opportunity to talk to small talkers or non-small talkers about Smalltalk and Cincom Smalltalk. Let's see. One of the things I want to start with, I know there was a bio, but probably everyone on this call has a unique path to how they got started with Smalltalk or how they discovered Smalltalk. So I just want to briefly mention mine in case some of the experiences are the same or it resonates. So when I graduated college, I started working for IBM, local semiconductor manufacturing company, and I was always looking for better ways to do software development, and that involved looking at new and experimental languages like Meld, like John Bacchus's FP. We actually had an internal implementation of that at IBM. So I was also part of a group looking at building future semiconductor manufacturing systems for IBM, semiconductor manufacturing. And in 1986, my project handed us all this book. Some of you may be familiar with it, by Brad Cox. And it basically outlined the benefits of object-oriented programming. And it also introduced Objective-C and how it was basically patterned off this great thing called Smalltalk. And I had two takeaways from this book, which I consumed. First was object-oriented programming solves a lot of issues in development methodologies, and this Smalltalk thing sounds great. So I looked to see if there were any Smalltalk implementations, and there was Methods by Digitalk, and shortly after they came out with Smalltalk V. So I got my hands on those and started learning Smalltalk and building things in Smalltalk. The biggest thing I noticed was in learning different Smalltalks, the domain stuff is easy. It's usually really straightforward and simple, and a lot of your time is spent becoming familiar with the GUI framework. And Smalltalk, the interesting thing to me is that I always looked at different languages and things all the time, and then I stopped because Smalltalk basically checked off all the boxes. I could get all the things that I wanted to get built quickly, easily, clearly in Smalltalk. So I actually went back and did my master's thesis work in Smalltalk. It was PetriNet simulation, and I built some factory floor layout tools in Smalltalk for IBM. Later, IBM was having some cutbacks, and they were basically killing the project I was working on. So I wanted to continue working with Smalltalk, and I found out that Park Place was opening up a New York office at the time. So I joined Park Place. And interesting thing, when I joined Park Place, I had been doing, this was 1992, I had been doing Smalltalk for 5-6 years. So for that wave, I was almost an old timer. And I know there's some people probably on this call that have been around the block and even helped build the block. So we have a lot of experience on this call. But one other thing, it was kind of a life lesson, and that is there's an old adage, see one, do one, teach one. And that's, I think it's largely from the medical community. But the thing about it is, when I joined Park Place, I worked as an SE. So I traveled around with sales and demonstrated, taught some Smalltalk and demonstrated our products, ObjectWorks, and later that year, VisualWorks, to potential customers. But then I had an opportunity to join the teaching staff at Park Place, and I taught a lot of classes in the Manhattan. We opened up a classroom in Manhattan, and then I also traveled around the country some and taught week-long classes. And even though I'd been working with Smalltalk for years, felt comfortable with it, built systems. Once you spend some time teaching, you have to explain, you have to answer difficult questions, you have to help solve people's different perceptions with learning the technology, when they manage to break things in the development environment, figuring out what they did, and then also developing. I developed the intermediate course, but the point is that even with the intro class, after a year of doing that, I think I doubled my competence in Smalltalk. So I call that a life lesson, because it's even something I pass on to my kids, that whatever discipline you're involved in, if you have the opportunity to teach it, you'll learn much more about it yourself. So it's a big advantage. So one of my goals for the presentation is to share some information that hopefully you have not heard. So I was able to dig up a couple things that even it was brand new to me. So hopefully some things are new. Some of this talk will be sharing ideas and insights of what we think is attractive about Smalltalk, and how to present it to non-small talkers, because part of the focus of our work is growing the Smalltalk community. And I welcome feedback on the ideas of, like, is this the most attractive thing? What things are attractive to new people? And like I said, a lot of the folks on this call have a lot of perspective and experience. So I'll mention briefly who is Cincom. Lots of people probably know, but it'll be, for those who don't, we'll mention it. What is Cincom Smalltalk? We have a couple products. Why do people choose Smalltalk? Recent developments in our products, notable features, and some demonstrations along the way. This is Smalltalk headquarters, and this is actually a drone shot by our media team. Cincom is sometimes called the most experienced private software company in the U.S. It's over 50 years old. And one personal anecdote: back when I was at IBM, one of the things I did was research relational database technology, and reading the works and articles by Edgar Codd. And at one time, he was evaluating relational database systems to see, and basically ranking them as to which were the most relational by his standards. And I remember reading an article about this relational database called Supra, and he basically gave it the highest grade as being the most relational of the relational database products. It met more criteria than any other. And that product, Supra, was by Cincom. So years later, when Cincom acquired ObjectShare, I was like, that name rings a bell, and I remember that name. So it was interesting to kind of see that a couple times in my career. The Smalltalk group at Cincom, and I know we have a number on this call, are pro Smalltalk. So, what does that mean? Well, part is we wish success for all the Smalltalk dialects, and of course, we want prospective customers. We would like them to evaluate our products, and we hope it's a perfect fit. But if it's not a perfect fit, we'd prefer they use any Smalltalk dialect versus some other language or technology. We want the total Smalltalk market to be increased. And I think when any of the Smalltalks have success, it benefits. The rising tide for Smalltalk lifts all the Smalltalk boats. So speaking of, I was talking to a previous engineering manager years ago, and it always stuck in my head because we were talking about the different dialects, and he said we're all in a boat together, all the different dialects, and we can row together or hit each other over the head with the paddles, and that was always a colorful picture. So Cincom is a commercial provider of Smalltalk, so we have a particular focus of making sure our changes to the product, support, our customer base, and we're careful to make sure that they can continue being successful with Smalltalk. So we have a couple Smalltalk products. First being Object Studio. And before it was Object Studio, it was Enfin Talk, and owned by companies like Enfin, Easel, and VMark. But one thing I learned new about it was the predecessor to Enfin was something called Scope. And Scope stood for Signal Command-Oriented Programming Environment. Okay, that's new to me. Another thing that was new a few years ago, at one time, Object Studio was sold by IBM in Europe as IBM Smalltalk. Wow. In 1992, Object Studio was acquired by Cincom. So I guess it's almost been 30 years now that they've had some Smalltalk products. VisualWorks, which came from ObjectShare, Park Place, Xerox PARC, was acquired by Cincom in 1999. Object Studio is we call the business analyst thinking tool. It has some UML-like tools that allow a domain expert and developer to work together in developing a system. VisualWorks, our cross-platform do-anything tool, works across a number of platforms and came originally out of Xerox PARC. So I mentioned we're a commercial provider and we have a customer focus. This is a list of a few of our customers that we have. And if any of you are involved with keeping a Smalltalk dialect up to date, it's a significant amount of work with multiple platforms, even just to stay even. What do I mean? Well, you've got things like new operating systems, and that can include new compilers, API changes. Recently, we're even seeing CPU changes, new standards that come out, new protocol updates, and last but not least, are customer requirements. So in our development, customer requirements, we have a joke, kind of half serious, half humorous, that customers would like us to advance the products but don't change anything. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you want things to improve, get better, add new relevant capabilities, update all the protocols as required, but you want things to be as compatible as possible because changes, if you're a customer with tens of thousands of interfaces, it's a lot of work. If you have something that, it only takes a small change, it can be a lot of work. And actually you could make your customer suddenly no longer successful with Smalltalk. So it's something that a commercial provider has to be very, very carefully attuned to. One of the things we do is get, how do we know what the customer requirements are? Well, we always welcome our customers to contact us and invite us to come visit them, give a roadmap. We call them listening sessions, though, because we're primarily there to hear how they're using it, what their issues are, what things are important to them. Our marketing group does customer user stories, and the product management group does mini surveys to get feedback on things we want specific information on. By the way, the noise isn't here. I didn't just walk down the stairs with the microphone. So some of the product management goals, a couple are obvious: improve and advance the product, respond to customer needs. I'm going to just talk a little bit about, it's really important to us to bring new users to Smalltalk and help educate both new users and our current users. So one of the things that we do is We have a monthly screencast called Hidden Gems. And Hidden Gems, we say, is shows you capabilities of the product that they might be hidden, or you may not know about them, but we think you'll benefit from. So we show different ways to use different tools, how to use some of the tools in the product, how different techniques, lots of different things. And we've built up quite a bit. I'll show some of those in this. Product management themes. The first is flow. Flow is a state of mind where focus and productivity and performance are off the charts. I always think that Smalltalk is such a perfect fit for this concept, because developers using Smalltalk, for example, in the debugger, can you can test your code, you can change your code, you can recompile your code, you can run it, you can look at the results. All those things takes longer to say than do. So you can get into a flow state of really super high productivity in Smalltalk. And we mention this because we mention this to our development team. Make sure we support and continue the ability for developers to work in a flow state. A flow state is often used with extreme sports and extreme athletes, where losing focus can be a matter of life and death. Fortunately, less critical for us. API. One of the things we've learned with talking to customers for years and years is almost all our customers take advantage of the development environment being in Smalltalk and making customizations in the development environment to support how they use it. And this is important because most products don't offer that. And this is something, rather than a customer being forced to work the way the vendor wants you to, they can customize their environment. So API, I mentioned that because whenever we come out with something new or looking at traditional things, we want to make sure that there's an API that lets people access it and customize it if it makes sense to, because that's one of the kind of the secret advantages of Smalltalk and how people are able to be successful with it. Finally, I touched on before, compatibility and upgrading. It's important that we don't make changes that make upgrading so costly that it basically puts them out of Smalltalk. I have a PM mantra that we discuss with the engineering team is, if you make changes, make sure they're worth it. So don't make the customer change their code unless they're getting a really clear benefit and they're happy to make those changes. So why do people choose Smalltalk? And I know everybody here probably has ideas. We try to spend a good bit of time thinking about it to understand how we can attract more people to Smalltalk. So, how do you explain it? Even with people who are not technical at all, I always like to say, well, when they ask what I do, and I work with this language called Smalltalk, and I say, well, do you use a computer? Yes, most people use a computer. The graphical user interface, drag and drop. You call these things files and you store them in folders. That's an office metaphor. And all these things were done at Xerox PARC in a language called Smalltalk. And they basically pioneered a lot of the foundation of what we have today in modern computing. And they can relate to that. So developing applications with Smalltalk, what's different or better about it? Well, it immerses you in interactivity with the live environment. We call it the debugger, but that's probably a bad name compared with a debugger in other environments. So you have this live, super productive environment. Doing more, doing better, and doing it with less. And if you were to try to summarize Smalltalk and object-oriented into a sentence or two, trying to explain what's better about it, you might say that, well, with Smalltalk, you can do the same amount of work with less code and clearer code. And overall, if you think about it, it's better organization, kind of in a nutshell. It's better organization. Why? Well, object-oriented for one. If you need to develop some code, where does that code go? Well, it belongs to the class who's responsible for that, the object that's responsible for that. So object-oriented is a big improvement just on organization and how you think about things. And that alone is a kind of a different or simplistic way of looking at one of the major benefits of Smalltalk. I touched on customization of the development environment, which we take for granted, but not everyone can do. And people use that. People make the environment, the development environment, work for them rather than having to change to work the way the vendor wants you to. And especially from the management perspective, how do you pitch it to management? It's return on investment. If you take the life cycle of a software project, and not just Smalltalk, any software project, there's a lot of work up front, but then a lot of the work is changes, fixes, and maintenance over the life cycle of that product. And done correctly in Smalltalk, you get a big return on investment. It's a lot less costly to develop and maintain a system in Smalltalk. One other point is that because Smalltalk is simpler, it lets you get your arms around more difficult problems, and you can be successful with some difficult software. And we've often seen this when people try to move to a different technology that doesn't yield that benefit. And sometimes they spend more money than it costs them to develop it in Smalltalk, and they fail and come back to Smalltalk. So it's interesting seeing those things over time. So that's some of the perspective about what we try to think about, how we can attract people to Smalltalk. Now let's talk about some changes in the product. So we've got changes in a number of different areas that I'll talk about. First is the VM. The VM, one of the things we do is, it may be underappreciated, but it's really important. We have platform updates, most recently with new builds and compilers on Windows and Linux. Between 8.x and 9.1, we're at 9.1.1 currently. We fully support perm space for our 64-bit images. We have 32 and 64. Some platforms are moving to 64 only, Mac OS in particular. We fixed a Linux restriction for processes space. And across the VMs, we've improved font measurement for better and more accurate layouts. And finally, we've done some research and development on what it would take to have a multi-threaded VM. Protocols, we have, for back some years and a number of cycles back, we had all our encryption work done in Smalltalk. And that started to become an issue. We're an international company, we export our product, and to get export certification got more and more difficult when we had encryption done in Smalltalk. So we externalized it for a few reasons. We externalized it to make it easier to export, but we also got other benefits of, we use the up-to-date standards that are out there, and with the highly optimized code that's out there to stay up to date and run faster for that work. So we shifted that. We have a new TLS plugin that supports advanced encryption. We support OpenSSL 1.1. You may have heard of, we have something in OpenTalk called STST, OpenTalk STST. That stands for Smalltalk to Smalltalk Communication. between images, and it can be images on a machine, it can be images on a network, that lets you do that really, really pretty easily. Communicate in terms of objects. So they're packaged, you can send a message across the network, package up the object result, and ship it back over the socket. And we've recently improved that. We basically looked at all the feedback we got from customers and wish lists from customers, and there were some restrictions such as the size of the messages. So we got rid of most of the restrictions, and also we allow secure communication. Another protocol we added is OAuth 2.0, which we now support. We've continued to improve our TLS plugin, improving that the past few releases. And we have a new certificate API. Another protocol that we got ahead of a little while back was supporting HTTP2, which most of the industry has moved towards. Source code control. So our source code control is primarily Store, and with Store works with a number of popular relational databases. So we have improved the atomic loading. We've improved things like if you rename something, you used to lose your visibility to back versions. So we've vastly improved that. So if you change the name of something, you can still, it basically understands the new name and the old name, so you can see old versions of something still, even after changing the names, which was important when those changes happen. We added MySQL support, and one of the big areas in performance for Store is recursive query support. So where you might have had a number of database calls for loading something, now a lot of that can be done with a single call using recursive query support. On the right-hand side here is from one of the hidden gems I mentioned. This one is showing how to use. It shows how to find, load, set up, and use the Store replicator. And the Store replicator allows you to replicate between two Store databases. So, for example, if you want to keep two Store databases, different databases in sync, you can do that with this tool. We also use this internally. You can also do things. One of the databases we support is SQLite, which is a really neat file-based SQL product. So you can basically select a subset or even back up your whole database, Store database, and write that to a SQLite file. So maybe if I want to share with somebody on my team, I can write those things to a SQLite file through Store. They can mount it through Store and see the different versions and have those other things. It's just one more way of sharing things and some flexibility because of the databases that are supported. Oops. Database. We have a number of enhancements for Postgres, which is one of the databases we support. We support the recursive queries on SQL Server. We added JSON API support for MySQL and a number of glorp query enhancements. The graphical user interface and tools. We call it GUI Tools. So a lot has been going on here with the GUI Tools team. We've been doing a lot of infrastructure work on VisualWorks for basically adding new capabilities while keeping things compatible for customers with the big investments in the interfaces. On the Object Studio side, we have a new data visualization framework that uses the Object Studio's NGUI, which is Next Generation User Interface. We also have actually, I'm going to show a couple of these things. But by the way, this graphic, as well as this one here, were from one of the hidden gems. These are the returns for every date of the year for the S&P 500s going back, I think, 5 or 6 decades. It gets the average return for each day, and it basically presents it as a heat map. So a dark green will be a slight positive, a bright green will be a higher positive, a dark red will be a small negative, and a bright red will be a larger negative. So you can basically see what days of the year on average are up days and which are down days. This was one of the hidden gems, and also our Object Studio team has replicated this using the Next Generation User Interface also. So we show how to do this, and this interface is actually built dynamically. So all these pieces are added programmatically, so you can see how to do that rather than sit with a painting tool and put a large number of widgets in place. Let me bear with me 1 second. I'm going to recorded a couple things in case I had any issues. So here is a COVID-19 data visualization. All the data is open source. Here's an application where you can see line graphs for new cases, deaths, and recoveries for all the countries available. It'll show a few countries here. Next up will be an application that shows basically the data in a tabular format. Open that up. So here's basically a summary by country for all the data available. Next allows you to look at the details for any country. And it's 0. Most of the things are 0 where it starts up and the numbers pick up later. Try to find a country with a little more data. I think India has a lot. As we scroll down, we start to see bigger numbers. And finally, we have where you can compare and get a graphical representation for a couple countries. So choose the US and India and decide what number to start at, and then list it out. So that shows the data on the left and a graphical representation on the right using the Next Generation User Interface graphics framework. The next thing is, I mentioned most customers customize their development tools. So we have a hidden gems where we show something. I basically wanted to use the browser, and I'm going to I'll open up the browser right here. And of course, the browser has everything, all the bundles, all the classes, all the methods available in here. And sometimes you want that. And you can hone in on something, go to the array class. You can also, if you want to find a particular method or particular class, type in the name of the class. You'll see it right there. But what if you just want to see just the things from your local store or just the things from your project. So I show you how to add this. The flyover says browse my system, and it has the browser just showing the bundles and packages for your local store or whatever store you choose. You can make it you can customize it to any store. So sometimes you just want to see in a very quick, concise fashion, just your stuff, because it's easier to find and work with those things when that's what you want. Also, at the end of the day, after you're done and you've got changes all over the class hierarchy, you may want to see what's unpublished because you want to publish it to store so your work is saved. Well, that other icon shows how to basically bring up an RB browser with just what needs to be published. So I found this is helpful for doing development, and a number of some of the engineers use this now as well. The ones with the plus, the red plus, those are packages that need to be published. Show here how the code for doing this. The Hidden Gem screencast walks through it in detail, but it's fairly simple to do and gives people something concrete they can work with, or the idea about how they can do that type of work themselves. Okay, with our web products, we support a number of things, including Seaside, but our primary web work is the SUE web server and AppX web framework, and we continue to update and build and improve the tools and provide examples for that. So more recently, we support ECMAScript 6 JavaScript for AppX. The SUE web server has been upgraded to be able to use secure connections with TLS. And also we have in the browser, in the code editor, the code editor also supports not only Smalltalk, but JavaScript. So it can parse and highlight and show senders and other implementers and such of your JavaScript code, which you can develop in these products and store just like all your Smalltalk code. Another important thing is product examples, especially in the web environment where things may be more complex. We have we have actually dozens of examples now, from doing simple things and working with other JavaScript frameworks like React. We continue to add new examples with basically every release as we also improve the tools. I always say you can do things fairly simply with Smalltalk, but if you have an example that's close to exactly what you want to do, that's your fastest path moving forward. And so we've had feedback from customers who want those examples because they're not as familiar in the web environment as they are the Smalltalk environment. One of the things we've done over time is both our Smalltalk products share a large foundation, and most of the work that our engineers do goes into that foundation, so it's available in both products as we move towards it. We started with that with version 9, and we're continuing to move the products closer and closer together. Some notable things that I'd like to talk about. I attended another product informational discussion not too long back, and one of the things that was discussed was asynchronous capabilities. I think all the Smalltalks have some asynchronous capabilities. They may have it all slightly different, but it's important because it's a way to get things done concurrently, which you often want to do, especially when you've got lots of things, lots of work to process. So I want to just mention a couple of some of the ways in Cincom Smalltalk that some of the asynchronous capabilities that we have. And then I'll touch on kind of a recent buzzword called no code, low code, and how we meet some of that definition. So asynchronous capabilities, basically the ability to do things like not block. So our foreign function interface, which is called DLLCC, you have the ability to not block and continue to get work done concurrently using that interface. We also have something called THAPI. Many of you know that stands for Threaded API, and several of our database connections use THAPI, so you can make basically asynchronous database calls. Another is something called Matrix. This is actually one of my favorites. Matrix is a framework that lets you start up headless images, hand them work, and then receive the objects back. And it's a fairly simple, I'll actually show a small example of it. By the way, Matrix in our current releases, it used to be a contributed thing, but it is now fully supported in the product. And you can use Matrix for things like map reduce. And actually, one of the hidden gems shows how to implement map reduce using Matrix and Smalltalk. Last, and I'll go into a little more about this, but green threads, which we've had basically forever in the product, but there's some ways to use green threads for an asynchronous ability that I'll go into detail in a moment. So with Matrix, here's an example method. I'm going to create a dictionary, a metric dictionary. I'm going to make it the size of my customers, create a semaphore. And by the way, what this is here, this is a kind of verbose and explicit example. There's actually some small, simple APIs in Matrix, but I wanted to go through kind of a more verbose example to show what you can do or what's going on or some of the flexibility. So N is going to be 5. How many virtual machines do I want is going to be N. I'm going to create a queue of customer keys, and that's going to be a shared queue, and shared queue is concurrent access safe. This is the code to basically launch N virtual machines. So it just takes a couple seconds to start up multiple headless images that are basically going to be sitting there ready to do the work. For each one, let's get the next available key. As long as that key is not nil, so in other words, I'm going to have multiple VMs going against this shared queue, pulling keys and handing out the work to a VM. And this is basically most of the work right here. I basically hand this block to that machine, and the block says, get the customer at key and calculate the metrics, and passes in the customer key as a parameter to the block. So that goes to that headless image, it processes it, and then hands the result back, whatever object or objects back, and I assign that to metric. Then I put the metric in a dictionary. After each one of these is done, when there's no customer keys available in the queue, it shuts the machine down. So it shuts down that image. Then I signal that is done. And then because I want to wait before I leave this method until all the machines have shut down, N times repeat, I wait. and I return the metrics. So that's one example. And like I said, there's some smaller, tighter API to this, but this is kind of a verbose, explicit example of what you can do using matrix. Green threads I mentioned. If you do, say, call out to a RESTful API, this is where the time goes. It might look something like this. The blue is your call out, the red is your wait, and then you get the data comes back and you process it, which is the green. So you can see most of your time is spent waiting. So if you do this, call, wait, process, and then send out your next call, wait, process, and then send out the next, you're going to be spending a lot of time waiting. With green threads, you can basically compress out a lot of that red time by having it overlap. So for example, as long as the server you're talking to allows the number, you can send out 100 RESTful API calls using green threads. So you can send them out in like 1 second. 100 calls go out. Then this is overlapping. The wait is overlapped. And as each result comes in, it wakes up that green thread, it processes it, and shuts down. And then the next can take place. So this is a kind of simple, straightforward way of really improving your throughput for that type of scenario using green threads. Which green threads, as you know, are kind of a simulated concurrency, but in this context, we get actual concurrency. No code, low code. So no code, low code is kind of a current buzzword. It's almost like what they used to call 4GL systems, kind of a maybe modern interpretation of that. Object Studio, I mentioned, has modeling and mapping tools, which you can see here. And that's kind of an excellent example of no code, low code tools. But we've got some others. Let me see. I'm going to show you something called a CSV Data Explorer. There's actually an IETF standard for CSV files with the column names up top. I'm going to go to Yahoo Finance, bring up the IBM stock, get 5 years of data I'm selecting, and download that CSV file. Here it is. Let's check it out. I have date, open, high, low, close, volume, adjusted volume. Okay. I have 5 years of that data from 2016 up till now. Let me show you a tool. You can load it right here in Object Studio. You can launch it right here, CSV Data Explorer. So I'm going to select a CSV file. I'll choose the one we just downloaded. I'll get the column headers, get some sample rows. I'm going to tell it what these columns are. Since most of them are number, I'm going to say make all the columns number, and then I'll go set a couple. I'll make the date, type date, and volume, I'll make an integer. I'll create the class in cache. It'll create a class called IBM, and it's showing me an example of all the data here in the class name. It's in a namespace called CSV. So let me open a workspace, go csv.ibm. I'll send it the message cache and inspect that. And there's the data. So I can see the high, low, close, open, volume, and the date. And it also has a cache index. And so I basically got this just using this tool. It created the class, and I can send a single message and get all that 5 years of data because it uses the IETF standards, and because we have a tool that works with that. So that's an example of how we, kind of meet that current buzzword, no code, low code. So we have no code written. Of course, you can go to that class and modify it. Say if you wanted to have an average of the open, high, low, close, you could easily add that single method that provides that. So that would be a low code solution. I have a couple of other product demos. We tabbed Windows API. So one of the things new to the product is a generalized tab API. I mean, most people are familiar with using tabs in Internet Explorers. These are some example applications that I built in the screencast. So here's a stock list app that I now opened by just saying with tabbed window ID, and you give it an ID. Here's another example application that was also shown how we built this, how we went to the internet, downloaded the data, and presented it in this fashion. So I can add that as a tab, just with basically as a one-liner. So now I've got multiple applications running as tabs in a window. Let's add another. One more that shows a chart. And you can also, if you're in a development environment, you can also do things like add a workspace. So you have your a scratch pad area right there in that window. That's adding the workspace. One more thing I want to show you. This is something from one of the hidden gems, a framework called Domain Master. And it shows how you can create something to support modular construction and reusable applications. So it's an example of using some of the benefits of Smalltalk even to a larger degree. And the interesting thing I think about this is if you look at things like this, okay, so here's a simple example application, and you can open it, it's blank. You can say value : and give it a domain object, and it has that. Now that's a small application piece that you can tie together with others. So here's those two applications tied together. The thing is it's using this example framework. It's actually very trivial to do. It's a couple lines of code. Here's a third application. This goes to the internet, pulls this data from a site down, and presents it. So let's take a look at that. The code for that, there's basically a couple getter methods, stock list app and stock app. There's a method for opening up that third application right there. And then the initialize is basically pretty much all the code. Stock list app is stock list app new. Stock app, you get your domain from the stock list app. And that's all you need to tie them together. And I bring this up because one of those life lessons, it's like, if you're just doing small things, this is neat. It's like, okay, that's neat. It's clever. But the thing is, if you start scaling it, then all of a sudden it's a huge benefit. It's and I worked at a hedge fund, and we used a similar framework. And as we started scaling up to hundreds of application pieces and tying them together, we noticed some things. The framework data or the framework code we're using all the time. So it's really well tested and rock solid and works great. And then all those pieces we can reuse in multiple areas. And remember back to the thing I was talking about with Smalltalk as an advantage for the ROI, the return on investment for a software system over its life cycle. Well, this was one example that really stood out to me when I used it at the hedge fund. Was if you were able to cut down on some of the code and have something where you can have this type of modularity in Smalltalk, it was just a huge benefit because there's a whole lot less code. The code is really well tested, and a lot of your maintenance depends on how much code you've got. So less code, less expense, easier to find things, easier to fix things. It snowballs as things scale up. So I want to emphasize that when you start to scale things in Smalltalk, make sure you're taking advantage of that, because there's some great opportunity in Smalltalk to get some really big savings. Showed some of the hidden gems tools. A quick mention on our upgrade cycle. We recommend all our customers keep as up to date as possible to minimize liabilities, make sure that they can use the latest operating system, the latest security protocols, and other refinements that we offer for the platforms that we run on. I might want to mention some of our resources, but by the way, if you go to our website, Cincom, Cincomsmalltalk.com, we've recently, the marketing team has revamped that. I think it looks really nice. And we've got lots of resources. If you're a customer and you're not getting the digest, you might want to consider asking for that. We send out a monthly digest with lots of things going on, tips, suggestions, links to the screencasts, links to tutorials, events like this one that we're on right now are listed there, so you can see these things. There's a blog, different facts. Hey, do you run on the M1 processor? You'll find that there. And by the way, that is and has been in development for a while. We're well aware of it and on top of it. Tutorials, the hidden gems, I alluded to it. I showed you a couple shorter examples of the hidden gems, but the hidden gems walks you through more explicitly through how to build and how to use those things. Events like this, the UK STUG, videos and presentations, technical and non-technical, books and media, and also Smalltalk opportunities that we're aware of. We will post there as well. One of the things that we have our personal use license product and our commercial license. And marketing introduced something called Rev, which is a way to get started as a customer. You can basically go online and buy the product. If you don't want to fully commit and talk to a salesperson, you can kind of try it out for a year and see if it works for you. And we've had a lot of people jump on this and take advantage of that. So it's a bridge. There's a URL at the bottom. And if you wish to connect with us, Suzanne is the director of Smalltalk Global Operations. We call her the Lady of Smalltalk. I'm the product manager. I welcome any feedback, any questions, anybody, or if you just want to chat about Smalltalk and what's going on. And also we have a star team in case somebody's out on vacation. Here's a team receives these emails, and we also make posts on Twitter about a number of things too. And with that, I open it to first. Thank you, everyone, very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Smalltalk anytime, and you're listening to this. I hope there was something new you learned, something you got out of it, and look forward to hearing your feedback.